Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us and being intentional with your time. I am privileged to be moderating this panel on behalf of the awesome Hacking HR community. Today, we'll be hearing from industry leaders who collectively have nearly 100 years of combined experience in the HR space. Our focus will be creating safe spaces at work, strategies for everyone to feel psychologically safe at work. This topic is highly relevant as we are about to enter May, which is Mental Health Month. So, without further ado, let me introduce myself and the panelists. Please join me, panelists. Hello, and welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. So, I can kick it off. My name is Cassandra Rose. As a global HR executive, I activate an organization's unique opportunities to align culture, processes, and systems to maximize their investment in their people. I'll hand it off to Colin.
Hello, I am Colin Mincy. I am the Chief Engagement Officer of Going Beyond the Work, which is a consultancy that I started that actually focuses on the ability for people to be their full selves across a myriad of identities and abilities. And it's wonderful to be here today to join this illustrious group of thought leaders on a conversation that I think affects us all. We have either worked or know folks who have worked in really difficult places, and I'm looking forward to a conversation on how we can improve our workplaces.
Awesome. Thanks. Tiffany?
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I'm Tiffany Castano. I'm CEO and founder of SEPHR LLC, which is an acronym for Cultivating the Evolution of Professional HR. I believe in advancing the profession to a space where we are a safe space for psychologically safe workplaces and elevating our profession from transactional to transformational. So I have this consultancy for small to medium businesses across the U.S., and it is an HR, culture, and DEIB consultancy. Excited to get into this conversation today.
Awesome. I love the transactional to transformational. I'm going to put that on a t-shirt. Thank you, Tiffany. Sheila?
Hello, my name is Sheila Kruger. Most recently, I was the head of global benefits at Zoom. And it's psychological safety, although a fairly new phrase to me in the last few years. I look back at my career and I see how many times that was not provided. And so it's really become a little bit of a passion for me. And I can only imagine what my peers were going through if I was going through it. So I'm just really excited to join the conversation.
Thanks for being here. And last but certainly not least, Lucy.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lucy Georgiadis, and I am the CEO and founder of Elevate Leadership. We do one-on-one coaching, we do live workshops, and we have a tech platform with 5 to 10-minute classes on all the most critical management topics. I've been a coach for the past 14 years. I've done many thousands of hours of coaching. So I come at this from the perspective of being an executive coach and working with a lot of our clients over the last 5 years or so on helping them create these more sort of psychologically safe work environments and helping managers within those work environments create more psychological safety on their teams and really be the bastions for that throughout the organization. So I'm fascinated to hear everybody's opinions on this panel and look forward to getting into some of the content.
Yeah, it seems like we've assembled the right people for this topic. So I want to go back to a comment that Sheila said in her introduction, right? This term, psychological safety, may be newer for those who are tuning in. So I actually throw it out to everyone. If you could give me 60-second, your definition and your interpretation of what is psychological safety as it applies to the workplace. And we can start with you, Sheila.
Sorry, there we go. I guess for me, it's kind of a four-prong. You need to be in a place where you feel included. You want to feel safe to learn, safe to challenge the status quo, and also to be able to contribute without any fear of being embarrassed or, kind of outed, if you will, about your ideas. You're not marginalized. You're not punished in any way for those for those kinds of thoughts and feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's spot on. It's it's exactly what psychological safety is. I quite like Amy Edmondson's definition of it as well. And for those of you who haven't heard of Amy Edmondson, she's done a huge amount of work over the last decade also on psychological safety and how to enable that more in teams. And she just says it's psychological safety is a shared belief held by members of a team that the team is safe for interpersonal risk taking in whatever sort of guise that may be.
I don't know if I have much to add to that. I I would also just add the ability and the safety to raise your hand and say that you're not okay, or that you need support, or that you need help, or that you're struggling. Um, Developing a relationship where employees feel that they're cared about and invested in beyond what they can contribute.
I love that. I don't want to leave you out, Tiffany, just in case you want to bring up the rear.
Yeah, I mean, they pretty much grabbed all of that. But I think I love what Colin said about being in a space where you're not okay, because so many times people are asked, how are you doing? And then people just move on, or you can tell there's just this knee-jerk reaction. So it's letting someone be supported in their full selves, but in an organization that truly walks its talk and not in a performative way. Am I allowed to make mistakes? And what if I'm not okay? How are you going to take care of me? And am I allowed to bring my full contributions to the workspace and have those be appreciated?
Yeah, that's great. And I want to welcome the audience. If you have a definition of psychological safety, or if this is your first time hearing that term, just put 1 in the comments and share what your definition would be as well. So now that we've defined it, now that that's clear, what are some signs that it's not working, that a workplace doesn't have psychological safety? Not to say that any one of us have worked in those places, but what are some red flags, as Gen Z would like to call it, that indicate that some place is not psychologically safe?
I would say that the large things all the way to kind of small things, being things like, people don't feel like they can raise their hand. You don't get a lot of healthy conflict. You're not quite sure how the team is doing. And ultimately, those kinds of things lead to a stifling of innovation as well. There's not a lot of creativity that happens. People aren't happy to sort of share those ideas, and because they're worried about them being shot down. So you get quite an unhappy bunch of people, and you also don't get a very creative bunch of people. So it has real business implications as well as having a lot of psychological implications too.
And Sheila, I saw you came off mute.
I did. I'm just thinking back again to my experiences, and I can remember, 2 different ones, one great, one not so great. One great, for all of his other flaws, I had a manager that, as I was learning how to do the work in that realm, always said, make your decision, implement. If it's wrong, I will back you 100% as long as you can show me, what your thought process was. And then he said, and if your thought process was wrong, then we'll talk about that. But you're not going to get in trouble for making that decision, which was an amazing thing for me. And that was pretty early in my career. Later in my career, it was this feeling of like really having psychological safety and always getting kudos, doing this, doing that, great things. And then one thing happens and boom, you're on the outside. Like you are not allowed to make a mistake. You are not allowed to, show any weakness. And that's, those kinds of things are just really horrifying for people. And for me personally, it was fight, flight, or freeze. And I would just freeze. I couldn't believe that they were coming at me with this stuff. And it was like, I made one mistake. And it just really colored the rest of my time at that company.
Yeah, Sheila, I can actually relate. I once was a expert at a specific skill of immigration, and I was working with an employee who was pretty high up in the organization at the time on their visa application. They disagreed with a decision I made and went to their boss. And an email came through CCing pretty much everyone who was involved saying, Cassandra is the expert in this field. We're going to take her advisement and guidance. And that surprised me that someone who was so many layers up, I'm pretty sure I just saw the bottom of their desk, if I looked up, was saying, this is the expert in this thing. And so we're going to respect that person. And I agree with you. A manager can set that tone. How can a culture of an organization set that tone so that we're not beholden to the super good manager or maybe the manager that needs a lot of development? How can an organizational culture support psychological safety? Any ideas?
Well, it's not expensive, right? It's not one of these business cases we have to make or explain the budget. It actually just takes intentionality and consistency. It takes, I think I heard Lucy say earlier, it takes like a made up mind that ours is a workplace where people of all identities and abilities can thrive and feel invested in. And so authenticity, I think, is the most important thing. People actually do know that it's not butter, right? They know the difference between margarine and butter. And with that intentionality comes strategies and stakeholder engagement and internal comms to bring people along on a journey that we're going to learn how to be curious, how to build community, and train and coach those who are barriers to psychological safety and hold them accountable. I think it's all of those things.
You said a word that's super important. Did anyone catch it? Accountability. Because I love what you're saying, right? I think every workplace wants to be that place that's an employer of choice, where people are excited to come to work. They're giving their best because they feel productive, they feel included, they feel like they belong. But how do we hold people who aren't supporting that or who aren't culture carriers of that mindset? Has anyone seen a place hold those people accountable? And what have been the steps to remediate those situations?
I think, I love where this conversation is going and what needs to happen, because so often we tell people, oh, that we have these policies saying there's no fear of, we won't tolerate retaliation, and yet you're allowing folks to stay there and excuse poor behavior. So I think being able to develop and pour into leaders, which has frankly been lacking in a lot of organizations many times, or bad behavior has been allowed. And so being able to train leaders to not excuse their behavior, to make sure that they are held accountable. And some of that comes back, a lot of it, most of it, to the values that an organization has. Who do you say that you are? And are you living behind that? Because there are behaviors or should be attached to the values of an organization. And this comes back to when we do things in a performative way, when people feel like, hey, I don't even know if I share this idea, if it's going to get stolen. I've had that happen to me from one of my leaders in the past, and a colleague who I sat in a room and they did it right in front of other people who, when you talk about authenticity, they knew and they didn't speak up. So is it a culture that also allows the right thing to be done even when no one's looking? And I think that intentionality in doing the right thing is really what sets the tone for the right culture.
Yeah, Tiffany, in the comments, someone is saying consistency is so important. It's one thing to roll it out and say, this is our demarcation line. This is what we're going to do as an organization. It's about, I like to use the term reboarding, constantly reminding people of our values. They're not just on a wall. They're not just in the employee handbook that you acknowledge. This is how we approach work, and this is how we treat each other. So thinking that through, what are some best examples of psychological safety you've yourself witnessed? I know Sheila used her example. I've used my example, but for someone who's a first-time manager, for someone who probably has a manager that's not exhibiting those behaviors, what are some tactics that they can use to bring the situation into a place where it's psychologically safe?
Well, I would just start by I would say that you can't lead me if you don't see me, right? And and we, long before we applied for a job or got the job, or entered the workforce or the workplace, we have lived, and we bring to the workplace pain and trauma and stress and experiences that shape how we feel about work, how we feel about power, how we feel about being led. And using one-on-ones to do things other than to go over a checklist and really understand who it is you're working for and where they've been and how you can support them is the most meaningful and important thing a manager can do. And building that rapport and that foundation so that when you are in conflict or when you're in crisis, there's a foundation that's already built, and that there is safety and familiarity, and it was proactively done by the manager, which I don't think is the experience of many people. So I would say, um, be curious and get to know the folks that you're responsible for leading.
Yeah, absolutely. I love those ones. Being curious, making sure that you're modeling that curiosity, and bothering to get to know them. I think also making sure that you demonstrate vulnerability and you acknowledge your own fallibility so that others can do that too. Is really important. And I think back to Sheila's point, really making sure that you're framing mistakes as learning problems and not as execution problems. And so that means that you're not pointing the finger and casting blame. You're very future focused in your project debriefs, maybe, or in your retros that you're having, or your one-on-ones with your team. What can we learn here that will help us do better in the future, as opposed to pointing fingers. And I think anything that you're doing to really encourage and demonstrate risk-taking as a leader, where you can, where it's appropriate, is really helpful to see that people can take risks and that they're not going to be penalized for doing so. And I think following on from Colin's tactic, I think probably the last one, which is a kind of extension of really getting to know your team. I think when you're in those conversations where you do have that ability to kind of demonstrate the things we've talked about, just making sure that you're engaged and you're present and you're listening and you're practicing that empathetic, level 3 kind of listening, where where the person feels very heard in those conversations as well. Those would be some ones that I would add.
Yeah, Lucy,
Yeah, and
if
I
I
think,
can. Oh, go ahead, Sheila.
sorry. Oh, I was just going to say, I just think it's really important that you create that atmosphere and that culture where you're thanking people for sharing their opinions. Show that you're genuinely happy that they gave feedback, and it encourages other people to do feedback if they've seen feedback taken well. So that, I think, feedback is such a vital part of being a manager and a vital part of the workplace that not everybody is really great at. So getting that feedback loop up and running and working well, I think, is really important.
I'm so happy you underscored that, Sheila, because that's the question I was going to ask Lucy around. You said level 3 listening. I was like, oh, was level 1, was level 2? Is there a level 10? What could that mean? And that goes back to feedback. So Lucy, if you could tell us a little bit more about what the levels of listening are, and then Colin, you can join in.
Oh, sure. So level 1 listening is where you're not really paying attention, but if somebody said like a cue word, like your name, you'd like tune in and listen to what was going on. So appropriate place for this would be in a Starbucks line or something while you're waiting for your coffee and you're not really listening, but when they yell your name that it's ready, then you're going to tune in. Level 2 listening is attentive listening, and that's where you are paying attention, you are listening, but you're also thinking about all kinds of other things. And I would hazard a guess that everybody on this webinar is probably listening to us with level 2 listening. And that is where you're listening to the content, but you're sort of thinking, how is this going to apply to my day to day? How should I use it with my teams? What are we going to have for dinner tonight? There's going to be all kinds of other things that are going on. And then level 3 listening, or empathic listening is where we are really tuned in to the other person. And it takes quite a lot of concentration and is actually quite tiring if you're doing it a lot. And when you're in those one-on-one situations is where you're reading between the lines, you're picking up on kind of what's not being said, you're watching for those micro expressions, those little cues that give you insight into how the other person is really thinking or feeling. And you pick up on an awful lot more when you're listening at that kind of level. And that's the kind of level also where your listener, the person that you're talking to, is feeling heard. And there's no point in being a great listener if the other person doesn't feel like they're heard. So it's very much of a two-way thing here. And to create those psychologically safe spaces, especially in one-on-ones, but also in group meetings, being super present and really listening into what others are saying are going to give you that fighting chance of everyone feeling that like they're heard and they can bring all those pieces to the meeting.
Okay, well, I feel like that's a whole session in and of itself. Thank you for that micro training. I appreciate it. Colin, I see that you came off mute.
Yeah, I was gonna add the importance of not ignoring signs that people are in distress or upset, or I call it up the ladder. One of the things I do which annoys people, when I ask people how they're doing, I sometimes follow up and say, well, how do you know? Right. So that I'm really asking you how you're doing. It's not something that I'm required to say because we're at the start of a conversation, but I really want to understand how people are doing. And then the other piece is that I think is really important is the trauma of uncertainty, and really committing to having decision-making frameworks and other transparent leadership practices so that people have trust in decisions, and even in the absence of power, people feel like they have some semblance of control. I think that's it's connected to communication and listening.
Colin, you must have been a poet in a prior life. I love the way that you phrase things, because this actually goes to a question that came through. And a thank you to everyone who's tuning in and putting in those comments and questions. So, can an individual contributor with little influence who's overly empathetic to his or her colleagues, managers, and probably are afraid to stand up, decompress a toxic work environment? So, exactly what you said. When there is an absence of power, if I don't have a team, if the one-on-one is just me coming with my agenda and now having to influence a manager who may not be creating that space, to Lucy's point, not because they don't care or they're evil, but they're level one listening. They have their things going on. They're putting their grocery list together as am I speaking. What can I do to take power in a situation that the power dynamic typically doesn't afford to be?
I think that's an interesting question, and I appreciate that. And I think, that comes up a lot as an individual contributor, especially as it relates to power, especially if you're not in a psychologically safe environment. And so I invite this person to ask a lot of curious questions. That's what I call them, excuse me, when especially if there's a toxic environment, because what often happens is someone is getting, gaslit because they asked a question or they did something that didn't align with maybe what this person wanted. Maybe the values in the organization weren't aligned. And so asking questions tends to take the defenses out of things. I love that we're talking about active listening as well. That's something that I was going to put in there too, but making sure that it shouldn't matter what level of leadership I am. Everybody deserves respect. Everyone deserves to be seen, heard, valued, and appreciated. And so I would say, yes, absolutely, you can impact that. Now, that a lot of times, because of our power structures and organizations and how they don't always allow for this to come through for people, especially for underrepresented folks and marginalized folks, making sure that you do advocate for yourself and you do have a voice. I believe that every voice matters. And so sometimes you may think your voice is the lone voice and you don't always know what other folks are sharing, or maybe that leader or that toxic environment is under scrutiny, and some things are being worked on. And by elevating your own voice, you're helping to be a part of unraveling this toxic environment. So I guess that's what I would add. I'd love to hear what others think too.
I would say that you absolutely can, as Tiffany says, take some actions to really help that group, because you'll find that probably if you've got quite a toxic, maybe not on purpose, as Cassandra says, but sometimes you may have that leader that is not creating that psychologically safe environment. But actually, you can, as an individual contributor in those meetings, if somebody's interrupted, for example, you can say, well, hold on, I was really interested to hear what Tiffany had to say. Would you mind hold on a sec until we finished? And you can interject, and without causing a whole amount of drama. Or you can say, if you've got you can sort of see somebody's got something to say, given that your manager or the leader might not say anything, you might be able to actually interject and say, well, Sheila, it looks like you've got something that you'd like to say, and I know that you're an expert in this area. I'd love to hear what you think. And so just because somebody else isn't bringing in those quieter voices doesn't mean that you can't, because you're not leading the meeting, in inverted commas. There's loads of opportunities for us to be able to either correct bad behavior that's going on in a really nice, genuine way, or bring other voices into the room. Even just acknowledging other people, oh, +1 to that. I really love that point that Colin made. Can go such a long way to make other people in that room feel psychologically safe. So you have your language, and you have your confidence, you have your ability to not necessarily, you're not defying your leadership, you're not having to give them tough feedback unless you feel, I would advocate for doing that, unless you feel you're able to. But if you're not, and you don't have that ability, well, then you can do an awful lot in meetings to create a really great psychologically safe space for other people.
Yeah, moving from being a bystander to being an upstander. And everything that all of you have said, right, are things that you can do as an individual contributor. You can add the +1. You can say, I co-sign, or, I disagree, and this is why. I think that was a really well-made, well-articulated point, but this is why I disagree with that statement. You can always show respect and articulate your own point of view. So we talked about individual contributors, we talked about managers, we talked about it culturally, but we all know the truth. Everyone expects HR to create and maintain and uphold and hold accountable this amazingly psychological safe workplace, right? And we can't be everywhere all at once. So I don't know if you want to share stories of your personal, or maybe, tangentially, your friends in HR who have shared, what are some things that you've had to do as the HR person who's called in the last minute to solve for either super psychologically safe and trying to figure out, how do I replicate this across the organization, or maybe something that was toxic and had to now solve for it before it became a greater issue?
So I don't disagree with the framing of your question, but I would raise you that we should talk about how the lack of leadership engagement, and leadership credibility, how that contributes to psychological safety, and how that not only creates psychologically safe issues with HR practitioners, but makes HR's jobs really difficult, right? And so um, I would say really being an influencer to leadership on why these trauma-informed practices are important in developing safety, and our mechanisms, and how high-performing teams are successful is really important, because everything HR does can be undone by the behavior of one leader. And so making sure that we have leaders who have the authority and the credibility to lead is a major step in getting the organization to commit to operating and working in a psychologically safe way. That's been my experience.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it doesn't work the other way around, right? HR has a really hard time recovering from that. And I think it's just so important overall culture to be, from the top down, engaging in this psychological safety, aware of it. I really question how many C-suite folks have a good understanding, course, the CPO probably knows about it, but I don't know that the CFO knows about psychological safety. So I think that's one of the roles that HR can play, is to just bring this to awareness that, we're trying to foster an amazing workplace. Here's one of the ways we can do that. Like, let's get better at our feedback. Let's make sure that people are being heard and they feel safe when they speak. And just having that kind of top down learning. And then also the transparency and the trust, so important. I was just talking with somebody yesterday about this. It's like, if you tell everybody your culture is transparent and you say, we're not going to do this and we're going to do this and we're not going to do that, and then the next day you do this and you don't do that and you do this, your trust is gone, your transparency is worthless. So you need to really guard those things. It's so important that the leaders of the company, and unfortunately HR usually has to be the police of that. Like, hey, you C-suite folks, this is what people are hearing. This is why you can't be doing that. So I just think it's really important that HR have that seat at the table and be able to have those conversations up to the C-suite and explain to them why this is so important.
I think the other thing, I love that, Sheila. And the other thing is, alongside that, is telling people why. If you are saying you're transparent and you're building an environment of trust, I am still shocked the amount that I hear, well, they just didn't understand. And I'm like, did you tell them why? Oh, well, no, or we did 6 months ago. This isn't on to our point of feedback. And I saw Manola in the comments talked about feed forward, to be able to really share why you can't. We can't do everything, maybe, as leadership, that's a tough spot to be in, but explain why and let it be an authentic why, and not be dismissive of anybody's wonderful contributions and ideas. And also follow up is another piece that I would add, because the number of times that people feel unseen, invalidated, because you didn't respond to their email, because they have to follow back up, because they're chasing you down the hall and they can't get a hold of you, or can't get the time, or you rescheduled the meeting 8 times. These little things, as we're talking about, they are pieces of microculture, and in subcultures can come about that way too. But I would say, definitely following up and feedback and making sure you share the why. They seem so simple and intuitive, but it is not happening out there. So I just have to share that. I have to get it off my chest this morning.
And I think sometimes if you don't have the why, it's useful to go get the data. And which is, at Elevate Leadership, we find that we have to help our clients a lot with presenting what they want to do, or the initiative that they want to run, to leadership in a way that really resonates. And especially if leadership don't understand the concept very well, it's helpful to have as much data as you can to go there with it. Because if you want your initiative supported, then there's definitely going to be a way of pitching it that's going to land and help you be influential in a way that isn't. And I'd say if you know that you've got a lot of psychological unsafety in your organization, and you've had a lot of feedback from folks, I would put together a survey for your employees to better gather how they're feeling, a little bit more data on the topic, and then you can go and use that. And a nice basis, if that's something that you'd like to do, just to bring it back in again, Amy Edmondson's psychological safety survey, if you Google that, you can find it, is 7 questions, and you mark it like true, sometimes true or false, like 210. And you can actually get a really good idea about how psychologically safe a team is on this survey. It's questions like, if you make a mistake on this team, it's rarely held against you. Is that 1 true, secondly, sometimes true or false statement? So it gives you these 7 statements to go on. And it's a nice basis for a survey that you can put together to get that data, which you can then collate and put into a good presentation and show leadership what's actually happening in their organization. Because again, as everyone is saying, without their buy-in, it is very, very hard to make sure that the culture is changed and then it perpetuates down the organization.
Lucy, thank you for taking us into the next section of our conversation. And if you'll believe it, we're already almost halfway through. a little over halfway through, around data. Sometimes in HR speak, right, we're saying those things, we're using these stories, and I believe in storytelling because we're impacting people. But you know what most leaders are going to ask? Where's the data? What are the outcomes? What then happens if we do this work? If we take managers off of working and do these trainings, if we have these surveys and we get these data points, what then? So Lucy, you gave a good example by just even having a survey. That's one place you can get a data point. But what are other data points that any of you have used? And what are some of the outcomes that you've told leaders they will receive by enacting these practices?
We included three questions to our performance self-review forms around examples or evidence that the employee experienced the team leader leading with DEI principles, stress and resilience principles, which we created institutional values around before the pandemic, actually. And then the third question we asked was, how can the organization support you better professionally or from a growth perspective? And we connected that to the self-review because we actually wanted to demonstrate that we cared about the whole person, in addition to how they were performing. And that's not data that you can measure or graph, but some of the feedback and suggestions that came out of that informed changes to policies and processes that people actually were able to see that their tangible contributions led to something changing, which I think we can't say yes to everything, but when we do say yes, we should talk about and celebrate that we got to a yes. And as Tiffany mentioned earlier, if it's a no, we should explain why. But I think asking questions and creating an expectation that we're going to have conversations about what you need that you're not getting and making that part of a routine conversation is very much part of building safe spaces at work.
I think also one tool that I love is the stay interview. So we focus so much on exit interviews, but like even post surveys. Lucy was talking about surveys, and of course we have to follow up and do something with the survey data, right? But that's why I love focus groups too. I think so often we're focused on quantitative data, but there is so much richness in qualitative data as well. And when you're doing that L3 listening, as she's saying, you're listening for the things that are underneath. And that's something I celebrate. I agree, Lucy, it is exhausting, but it is so worth it. It's one of our values here. And so making sure that you're doing that, but just taking every opportunity to, we don't leverage our one-on-ones as much. 360s are done more from let's check on this person's performance versus let's understand how we really can grow our team, how we can build in some accountability where, we can build those types of behaviors, the right ones within the organization. And just focus groups, listening to people is really something that kind of is still, I feel like, sometimes I feel real old school when I say that because I've been in HR 16 years, but they are still very valuable tools. Anything you can do to demonstrate to your team that you're listening, you don't have to do it all, and you shouldn't do it all to a certain degree, just especially if you're going to do it just to do it. So, but those are some tools that I still leverage that have just shaped culture and shifted it, quite frankly.
And as a little nod to that, if you found that you've done some surveys and got an awful lot of qualitative data, which is the best, really, as exactly as Tiffany says, kind of data. The devil's in the detail always. You can find so much interesting stuff in there. What we do if we've had to survey a lot of people is we put it into, we use AI now to help us out. We put it through Claude. which is OpenAI's service. And Claude's amazing at being able to pull out key themes and give you a summary of what people are saying. Now, I know you may lose a little bit in that, but it does really help when you've got a lot of qualitative survey information to really distill the main themes and the main headlines for leadership if you're finding you're feeling a little overwhelmed with that part.
Lucy, I love how you brought AI into a psychologically safe workplace. Kudos to you, extra 5 points. So as we start to wind down, I love all the tactical advice that's being provided around surveying. When you're in a one-on-one, listen at a 3 level, right? Lucy, I'm getting that 3-star level, I'll even call it. Colin, a lot of what you're saying about there's only so much HR can do about leadership. Sheila, what you're saying about trust. Right? We can set all the things together, but if we're not actually acting out the behaviors that we're expecting from people, or we're allowing certain people to get away with behaviors and are not holding them accountable, it all falls apart. So what are some things that we can do in our day-to-day lives? If someone comes to us and says, hey, I'm trying to be a better leader. For those who know that they need to be better at it, I'll start with myself. I want to be a more psychologically safe leader, individual contributor, team member. How can I change myself to do those things? I can't necessarily run a survey. Don't necessarily have the power dynamic that's spread outside of the team I may lead, but me, myself. And we talked about it a little bit about being an upstander. What can I do? What have you yourselves done?
I ask for feedback. And I say I don't know when I don't know things. And I ask folks at all levels what they think. And I listen, and if someone is quiet in a meeting or their camera's off, I don't ask why their camera's off. I follow up with them after the meeting. These are not hard things, but they are meaningful. And if they are done consistently, if we're thoughtful and gracious and empathetic consistently, that's the kind of work environment I would want for myself and I would want to thrive in. And so create that for someone else. That's really just a basic humanity at work.
Yeah, I think part of it is just, setting the expectations. Whether you're a longtime manager and you're suddenly aware of this and it's a new thing for you, going out and being vulnerable and saying, hey, I realize maybe I've made mistakes in the past. I really would love to change that. I would love us to have more open communication. I want you all to feel safe at work. Start establishing those norms and expectations so people can predict what's going to happen and they know that you're going to be fair when they jump into a conversation. Encourage open communication. The active listening, the level 3 listening is so important. Make sure that people feel supported. I love, Colin, that you're following up with people that aren't on camera because at Zoom, that was a big deal. I was like, why is your camera on? And then showing appreciation to people when they do show up and they speak up. I think those things are all really important. And, nothing's going to happen by osmosis, but I do think that you do have an impact on those around you when you do these things successfully. And the people around you see what's happening and they see your behavior driving driving success in this area. They take notice because it is noticeable. And so it's one of those things where, the more you do it, then somebody's going to talk about it and then they'll tell 2 people and she'll tell 2 people. And she'll tell 2 people. And I think it's just really important to just implement and do the work and just be genuine about it.
I think too, I'm a very curious person and I love the power of questions, which is why I always talk about it. But I think, one of the things I've done, whether it's an intern or someone else on the team, is there's a base level understanding in a psychologically safe environment that it is two-way. This is a dual relationship. It is not just about me, the leader. I will ask, what is it that you're looking for? And that can start with the interview process, to understand how, as an organization, can we help support you in your growth and make sure that we're the right place for you so that we don't end up doing harm, or that there's a values mismatch. And just be real, as I think it was Lucy who was talking about vulnerability earlier. If we know that we're not the place for you, then let's call that what it is and not try to force that, because you can do more harm on the other side with that. And just letting people have the autonomy in the workspace is super key. I was chuckling when Colin talked about the camera, because that's still a conversation that I'm having. And I've had to say, like, ask the question, right? Ask the question why that camera is on. Let me give you the myriad of reasons why that camera may not be on. We have to come from a place of what I call grace and space, and giving people that empathy to show up. You don't know why that camera may not be on. And so that's, I guess I would add that as well, in terms of, when you're thinking about these strategies, it does come back to the everyday piece and recognizing that we're all humans. We're all humans at the end of the day.
Not only am I enjoying this conversation, I'm thoroughly enjoying the comments. People are responding to each other. They're creating psychologically a safe comment section, which on the internet is a superstar thing to do. So kudos to everyone in the comment section for keeping it super positive. Lucy, I want to get to you before I ask my next controversial question. So Lucy, just wanted to make sure you got your thought out.
Yay, controversial questions. I was just going to say thanks, Kimberly Brown, for putting a link into there for Amy Edmondson's survey. That's really helpful. And also a very nice suggestion from Manola Jack in there, who some of you might know, which is also super helpful. Yeah, my closing remark is really just to echo, especially something that Colin said. If you're worried that you're not creating psychological safety on your team and you want to level up a notch, it is really easy to lean your ladder against the wrong tree. And so you really do need to ask for feedback, because there is no point in thinking that you're terrible at this and trying to fix all things all at once. You may find that if you're getting a sense that something is amiss on your team, or maybe you've been told one or two things, that like there may be something quite small that you're doing, which you don't realize, and is certainly not your intention, but is being perceived a certain way. It's unlikely that you're doing everything wrong. So, give yourself a break on this, but it's worth identifying exactly what it is. And even if you've got a direct report that you trust, that maybe has come to you with some feedback before, ask them to look out for it in the next couple of team meetings that you have and give you live time feedback. Is incredibly useful to get that, than try all things, like throw it against a wall and see what sticks type of approach, because small tweaks can go a really, really long way.
It's true, Lucy. So it actually is a good dovetail into my controversial question, which I made sure to save for the last. So for everyone who's been tuning in, this was the question you were waiting for. We've tried that. We've tried to improve upon the culture. We've tried to improve upon the leaders. We've done trainings. We've done surveys. This place is toxic. I need out. How do you know it's time to go? And what are some things you can do to leave with dignity? I knew it would be a mic dropper.
So as a person who has burned out, and recovered, thank God, I will say that any physical or emotional manifestation of work-induced stress, where Sundays your stomach hurts and you're not sleeping, and your relationships at home and personally are starting to be impacted, long before you get there, there's a better place for you. And I always say that sometimes the soil is rich, but the plant needs to be in a different pot. And there are other pots out there, and yeah, this is not, no job is worth any of those things, or any limitations to you living a happy and healthy life.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Colin. And I've been in the same place where it's been like you just get to the point where it's like, I can't do this anymore. And getting out gracefully is sometimes very difficult because if somebody's openly antagonistic towards you, they're waiting for you to leave. And it's really hard to let go of that. If I leave, I lose feeling. It's really not. You've got to think that if I leave, I win because I don't have to feel like this anymore. And I get to go someplace where I can feel valued and I can feel like I am worthwhile and I can bring my whole self to work and I can get support and I can feel safe. And so I think it's just really important to look at those things and make the decision and just do it. I mean, hashtag mental health is health. It really is.
Tiffany, Lucy, and Sheila, I love the hashtag. It's true.
It is. I agree with that. I've been through 3 rounds of burnouts. I've been through toxic workplaces where someone literally paced in front of my desk to intimidate me. I've been through a few depressions from the workplace. When I take this very seriously because it is personal for me, because to Colin's point, if you need to repot yourself somewhere else, when it starts to impact your health, I had reached a point where I hadn't needed to be in therapy for a while, and having people pace in front of your desk and lie on you and discredit your work and all of these things, the moment I knew I had to go back into therapy, I knew it was time for me to leave. And so trust your instincts as well, because we do this thing sometimes where it's, oh, is it me? Especially when you're in a toxic environment, it can make you start to feel like, oh, maybe it's just me. And so those, when it does start to manifest in those ways, only you know what's best for you. And, ideally you can get out before any of those things, before you have to go through some of the struggles that we've shared.
Oh my goodness, people are the worst. Seriously, what? Goodness. I'm sure lots of people dialing in have got similar stories as well, but it goes from bad to worse. This is like terrible. And I think, I really can't say it any better than the three of you on the panel who've really lived it. Then if senior leadership cannot sort it out, if senior leadership cannot fix a toxic workplace, then you can take your skills elsewhere. It's not you running, it's not you failing, it's not you being pushed out. At the end of the day, there are lots and lots of companies with fantastic leaders who don't create toxic work from the skills and the knowledge and the expertise that you bring. So it's their loss.
Thank you. I love that each of you talked about a way to empower yourself. You're not losing. There is no win-loss, right? We are all going into work to do things that are productive, that we find to be meaningful, that contribute financially and hopefully in other ways to you. So when those things are turned off, right, those are signs in and of themselves. And similar to Colin and Sheila and Tiffany and Lucy, I'm pretty sure you've had that point. I was physically getting so ill. I was seeking out different specialists. I was like, something must be wrong with me, right? Yep. And then I took a week vacation, 1 week. 3rd day, I felt 90% better. I was eating, I was laughing with my friends. I was like, oh, I'm sick of my job. That's the ailment that my body is feeling. And so there's no way I didn't know that before. It got to a point where my body had to say, it's enough. You've gotten to your limit. And when we're burnt out, it's hard to leave with dignity because the thing you just want to do is quit, right? But then you think about your bills. And then you think about what I'm going to do next. How hard is it? And that's when you feel trapped. And so I love what was said around your instincts. There are things, there are signs, there are red flags, whatever you may call them, that are telling you that there's a mismatch here. And I do encourage and invite everyone, and I think that's the intention around this panel. We're defining it for you. We're describing actionable tactics to take. Fight for what you believe in. But there is also a dignity in the fight that you take elsewhere, where it will be heard, where it will move the needle. And hopefully you get to determine when that is way before your body has to tell you. So I know, the comments were lighting up. So thank you for just being so vulnerable in sharing your stories and the things that have to do. So hopefully in a quick 1 to 2 minute summary of everything that we were able to go over in this hour. What are some things that you hope for the future, for the workplaces, as things are going on across the globe, sometimes closer to home? What are some of the best practices you've seen or best practices you hope to see in workplaces moving forward, especially as we enter Mental Health Month?
I would love to see a commitment to education around psychological safety. And I'm not talking about training for 8 hours. I'm talking about training with follow-up individualized coaching on what we're taking from this learning and how we're implementing it into our work and our work relationships. I'd like to see leadership teams do that on a mandatory basis and cascade down levels so that people understand what good looks like. Because after there's a space for education, there has to be a space for accountability. Managing and leading is a privilege, not a right. And there are folks who are elevated because they've been kicking around or because they're technical experts and they don't have any business leading. And so I'd like to see coaching and training, and I'd like to see accountability for those who impede safe spaces at work for their colleagues.
Yeah, I think I'll build off what Colin said around that last point. Totally agree with the coaching and the training, and that's what we're here for. And I think some people do have the intention of being better. They want to create healthy spaces, but actually doesn't come naturally for a lot of folks. And their authentic self that is true to themselves, as it were, is still not somebody that necessarily creates a safe space. And that's part of their upbringing. That's part of their learned behaviors from working in other situations and having poor mentors or poor leadership in other places. And actually, sometimes their intention is good, but they just need the tools, which are learnable. This is all very teachable, and you definitely can change. But the point that I wanted to build on with Colin was the accountability part, because I see this so much in the work that I do, is that toxicity is tolerated for so long when it doesn't need to be. And a lot of the times that's because people are afraid to have tough conversations and are afraid to fire people. Now, I know that's much easier said than done in most other places in the world, except for the United States. And so sometimes that is not an option, but being able to have very tough conversations around people's behavior, which is personal. I'd love to see more of that from senior leadership. We end up training a lot of senior leaders on this kind of thing too. So they need training on how to do that and feel their confidence is raised in being able to lean in and hold those folks that are creating these awful environments for people accountable for their actions.
Yeah, and I think it was interesting to talk about, what you always carry into your new job, everything that happened to you at every old job, right? And so, when you get to a certain point and you've been burned 2-3 times, you almost expect it. So it's really hard to kind of, let yourself open up and be susceptible and vulnerable when you're in that new spot. And so I think it's just so important for people to be able to have that psychological safety, have a conversation with the manager, talk about what's their style, all that. And I know when I was a manager, I loved talking to my people when they came in. How do you like to be communicated with? What do you like for a reward? Do you want praise? Do you want a gift card? All those kinds of things. I just think the conversation should be part of the natural occurring thing when somebody onboards, to talk about what is it going to take for you to feel safe here. I would love for that to happen.
Yeah, and I would add just, we've post-pandemic or whatever state we're in, we have all kind of rushed on back to doing things, and we've forgotten how beautiful of a thing the pause was, to slow down, to set that intentionality and set the right expectations and leave space for feedback and humanity to flourish in the workplace. So I would say, slowing down and really just back to listening and holding and making space is what I would leave with.
That was a beautiful articulation. Thank you all so much for leaving us with hope in our hearts for what can come next. Thank you for your insights. Thank you to everyone who's joining us live or listening to us on replay. We appreciate that you are intentional about creating a safe workspace, no matter your level. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks so much.